I never meant for any of this to happen. If you had asked me a year ago, I would have sworn my life was simple, predictable, and perfectly under control. But that was before everything unraveled, before I realized how lonely a relationship can feel when the person you love doesn't love you the same way anymore. My name is Ethan Rivera, a junior studying media arts, and I used to believe that being with Noah Bennett was the best thing that had ever happened to me. Noah was charming, admired, and confident in ways I never managed to be. When he held my hand, I felt like the world finally saw me. But lately, our connection had stretched thin, like a string pulled too tight, ready to snap. We didn't fight. That would have required passion. Instead, we avoided the truth with small, polite conversations that carried no warmth. Noah was always working, always busy, always too tired. He kissed me out of habit, not desire. And every time his phone lit up during our dates, I felt myself shrinking a little more inside. Still, I stayed, convincing myself it was just a phase. Then Liam Hayes crashed into my life, literally, when he tripped over a suitcase while moving into my apartment. Sorry. I swear I'm usually coordinated, he laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. There was something disarming in his smile, unguarded and sincere. He was the kind of person who wore his heart in his eyes without caring who noticed. Liam was everything Noah wasn't. Openly gay. Unapologetically loud. He filled a room like sunlight fills a window. And unlike Noah, he asked questions and actually listened to the answers. At first, I kept my distance. I wasn't ready to explain why the framed photos on my nightstand showed Noah standing just far enough for me to appear like a friend rather than a boyfriend. I wasn't ready to admit that even in pictures, we didn't truly look like a couple, yet Liam's presence was magnetic. On mornings when I dragged myself out of bed, exhausted from overthinking, he already had coffee brewing, exactly how I liked it. He'd claim it was no big deal, just an extra mug. But kindness like that felt rare. Dangerous, even. We developed an easy rhythm. Shared dinners when Noah cancelled again. Quick laughs between classes. Jokes whispered in the kitchen at midnight so the neighbors wouldn't complain. Every moment felt like a secret the universe hadn't decided whether to punish or protect. One night, as we washed dishes together, Liam asked casually, "So, are you seeing anyone?" I froze. Soap slid from my hand and splashed into the sink. The silence between us thickened. Yeah, I finally said, my voice barely audible. His name's Noah. Liam didn't pry. He didn't tease. He simply nodded, though his expression shifted, just slightly. Disappointment? Confusion? I wasn't sure, but the air felt different afterward. I caught myself noticing things I wasn't supposed to, how his hair curled when he stepped out of the shower, how his laugh echoed down the hallway, how his eyes softened when he looked at me longer than he should. I told myself it was harmless. I told myself I was loyal, but loyalty feels fragile when you're starving for affection. Why best friend Chloe saw right through me. "You're glowing when you talk about Liam," she said, nudging me during lunch. "And Noah? He's barely a sentence anymore." I rolled my eyes, but her words sank in like stones. I wasn't ready to confess that I had started to crave the life I imagined with Liam, one where I didn't have to hide my relationship, or myself. A life where love wasn't rationed out like a privilege. One quiet evening, the power flickered out from a storm raging outside. Liam lit a candle, its flame dancing between us as rain hammered the windows. The shadows made the apartment feel smaller, more intimate. He shared stories about past heartbreaks, people who left once the excitement faded. His voice trembled, and I felt something inside me shift. I wanted to reach for his hand, to tell him I understood that fear all too well. My heart leaned forward before my body could, but I stopped myself. I couldn't cross that line, not yet. As I lay awake that night, staring into the dark, I finally admitted the truth, if only to myself. This wasn't innocent anymore. Something dangerous had already begun. For a while, I convinced myself nothing had changed. I repeated that lie every morning. I'm still loyal to Noah. Liam is only a friend. This is harmless. But the more I denied the truth, the closer it crept. Noah's distance grew thicker, like a wall I couldn't climb. He answered texts with single words, forgot plans we made, and treated affection like an inconvenience. When I finally asked if everything was okay between us, he just sighed and said, "Not now, Ethan. I'm swamped." So I waited. I always waited. Meanwhile, Liam filled every gap Noah left behind. We cooked together, studied side by side, and laughed until the neighbors banged on the wall. He made our apartment feel alive, like a place I wanted to come home to, rather than a cage of unanswered questions. But the guilt clung to me like smoke. I hid my lock screen photo, Noah's arm around me, smiling at the camera, face turned away just enough that strangers would never guess we were together. I started angling my phone so Liam wouldn't see it. Because every time I looked at Noah's picture, my heart felt heavier. And every time I looked at Liam, it felt weightless. Liam never asked more about Noah. He only observed me quietly, like he could read the silence in my chest. One night, while we sat working on our laptops, he said softly, "You don't seem happy." "Not really." His words struck harder than he intended. I closed the screen. "I'm fine. Just stressed." He didn't believe me. I didn't blame him. Chloe was less gentle. "You're lying, to Noah and yourself," she warned during one of our coffee breaks. "Emotional cheating is still cheating." I hated hearing that. Hated that she was right, yet I kept wandering back to the same dangerous cliff. A week later, on a Friday night that should have been a celebration, Noah forgot my birthday. He didn't call. Didn't text. Nothing. I tried to ignore the ache in my throat, mumbling excuses for him, busy, tired, overwhelmed. But the truth was simpler. I didn't matter to him like I once did. When I got home, Liam had decorated the kitchen with cheap paper streamers and a lopsided cupcake topped with a single candle. "Make a wish," he said, smiling shyly. I laughed, but my chest tightened. No one had done something so thoughtful for me in months that I closed my eyes and wished for clarity. When I blew out the candle, Liam stepped forward to pull me into a hug, warm, steady, sincere. His arms lingered around me a second too long, and I didn't pull away. The world felt still in that moment, like everything that hurt had faded just enough to let me breathe again. The next morning, guilt hit me like a freight train that I avoided him for days. Quick hellos, mumbled excuses, locked doors. I thought distance would keep us safe. Instead, it only sharpened the longing. Then came the storm, thunder rattling the windows as the apartment plunged into darkness again, like the universe wanted to test me twice. Liam and I sat close, wrapped in blankets on the couch while the wind screamed outside. The flicker of candlelight softened his edges, making him appear almost unreal. "We don't have to pretend," Liam whispered, voice trembling. "I care about you. More than I should." His confession stole the air from my lungs. My heart thrashed inside me, half joy, half terror. "I have a boyfriend," I choked out, the word sounding flimsy and useless. "I know," he replied. "But you're not happy with him. Anyone can see that." I wanted to deny it. I wanted to tell him he was wrong. But the truth was already written in my heartbeat. Liam's hand grazed mine, searching, questioning. I didn't move away. Our faces drifted closer, pulled by a force neither of us could name. When his lips brushed mine, the world collapsed into that single point of contact, electric and terrifying and so painfully right that it lasted only seconds before panic snapped me back. I jerked away, breath unsteady. "I shouldn't have." "No," he said, shaking his head, eyes filled with equal parts hope and hurt. "We both did." Silence swallowed us whole, louder than the storm outside. I stared at the floor, unable to meet his gaze. That I had crossed the line. There was no pretending anymore. Somewhere inside, a voice whispered a truth I didn't want to face. This wasn't a mistake. It was what I had been wanting all along. The kiss should have been the end. A fleeting mistake, easily buried beneath grief and fatigue. But it became a seed, and from that seed, something grew, something we tended in silence, even when we pretended otherwise. Daniel no longer asked me to come over, he simply expected it. His home had shifted from a place of mourning to a space that pulsed with unspoken tension. We moved around each other carefully, like dancers in a fragile choreography. A glance across the table, a brush of hands while passing a plate, every small act was threaded with a current we couldn't deny. One evening, as autumn bled into winter, I found him sitting by the fire, staring into the flames. He looked weary, but when I sat beside him, his hand reached for mine without hesitation. The simplicity of the gesture was more intimate than the kiss had been. It said, "You are not just here, you belong here." My chest tightened, torn between the sweetness of the moment and the guilt that never loosened its grip. The intimacy grew slowly, almost reluctantly. Nights blurred into mornings, and I began leaving clothes in his drawers, books on his shelves. At first, it felt accidental, but soon it was deliberate, a quiet claiming of space. Daniel didn't resist. In fact, he seemed relieved by it, as though filling the void left by Michael was less daunting when I was there to shoulder it with him, yet shadows lingered. One night, after a long silence, Daniel admitted, "Sometimes I feel like I'm betraying him." His voice cracked on the word betraying, and the weight of it settled between us. I wanted to tell him he wasn't, that love was not a fixed quantity to be exhausted, but a river that could shift its course. Instead, I held him and whispered, "Michael loved you. He wouldn't want you to drown in his absence." Even as I said it, I wondered if I was trying to convince him, or myself. The secrecy became its own kind of confession. We never spoke of what we were to each other, never dared define it. And yet, the way his eyes softened when I entered a room told me enough. The guilt didn't vanish, but it dulled beneath the routine of companionship. Soon, it was no longer about one kiss or one night, it was about a life quietly being built in the shadow of another. The turning point arrived in a whisper rather than a declaration. Daniel was making tea in the kitchen, humming absent-mindedly, when he called out, why don't you just move in? He said it as though it were the most natural thing in the world, not a question but an inevitability. My heart leapt and sank at the same time. Moving in would mean crossing an invisible line, cementing us not as friends or confidants, but as something Michael had never imagined. Still, I agreed. Slowly, my belongings filled the spaces Michael once occupied. The wardrobe, the bathroom shelf, even the drawer where Daniel kept old photographs, each change marked a quiet erasure and a new beginning. Daniel didn't flinch. If anything, he leaned further into me, allowing me to become the center of his daily life. Months later, he asked me to marry him. There was no grand gesture, no sparkling lights or elaborate speech. We were sitting at the same table where we had once shared countless glasses of wine, his hand trembling slightly as he slipped a simple ring across the table. "I don't want to lose you too," he said. His eyes were clear, though shadows still lingered at the edges. That I said yes, though the word carried a weight heavier than joy. Our marriage was not born of pure beginnings, it was born of grief, of need, of blurred lines and stolen moments. And yet, it was real. The ceremony was quiet, attended by only a handful of friends, stripped of fanfare. He wore a suit, I wore a dress, and we both wore the invisible burden of what brought us there. Standing beside him, I felt both chosen and haunted. Chosen because he wanted me to be his future, haunted because his past still echoed in every corner of the home we shared. I could feel Michael's presence lingering in photographs, in stories, in the spaces Daniel and I now occupied together. As the vows ended and the rings slipped onto our fingers, a single thought pulsed within me: I had become his comfort, his second chance, his escape. But I would never be free of the question that whispered in the back of my mind: did Daniel marry me because he loved me, or because he couldn't bear to let go of Michael entirely? I smiled for the photographs, but behind the smile lived a truth I could never erase: our love was real, but it was also born of infidelity. And that truth would remain, quietly shaping every chapter that followed.